Well, we're on another blog now, a vlog about the blog. Yes, we're following the footsteps of Isabella Bird, and well, she's just gone through Pangkor. This is in the Dindings. She'd attended a trial of one of the people who'd been chopping up, what's his name, Superintendent Lloyd. Well, look at the previous video and you'll find out all about that. What was Pangkor? Right now it's a holiday resort, but it is really the centre of one of the most important events in Malaysian history, and that's the Pangkor Treaty. Now, this was a treaty that was signed on board a steamer that the British brought and shoved in the harbour there. And what they did was, essentially invite all the chieftains of the river, the Malay chiefs and the Chinese chiefs, to come and discuss the future of Perak. Yeah, invite. Well, actually, they sent men armed to ask and request, and these people had been witness of what's happening in Kuala Selangor, with a bit of gunboat diplomacy, a few places blowing up and so forth. So requested. How did that come about? What we've got here is that essentially, and we'll go into this a little bit later on, essentially the area of Lurut, let's just start there. The area of Lurut, which is now called Taiping, it was a war zone. Essentially, it was a very rich area, mining area, run by a guy called Nga Ibrahim. Yeah, Nga Ibrahim, with his psychic Captain Speedy. It's such a great name. Should be a TV series about them. Anyway, Nga Ibrahim was the son of another guy, as people are, you know. He was the son of the guy who found gold and found the tin mines and even gold, I do believe, in the area. I think his name was what was it, Long Jafar. Yes, there's a sort of Siamese connection with that name. Anyway, what happens is that the young upstart of Nga Ibrahim wanted to turn this whole place into a real business opportunity and open it up to the Chinese, because that's where the money was. Get lots of Chinese in and do it on an industrial scale rather than this small scale Malay operation that had been there before under his father. So he wanted to come in there and go big time. He did sort of go big time, and the Gihing, a Chinese secret society, went in and took over a large area of it, of the mine works, and the Heisan, another Chinese secret society, took over another bunch of works, and they fought over the rest. They tried to get a monopoly. They fought over the opium, they fought over the gambling, they fought over the brothels, they kidnapped each other's women. They were fighting all the time, to the point that they're actually slaughtering people. We're talking thousands here. And one of the big wars, there were several wars of these, was simply that the head of the Heisan ran off with the wife of the Gihing. Unbelievable. It's the Afghans always say that wars are all about money and land and women. Yes. Afghans, how prescient. Yes, so in fact, you'll probably find the same kind of sort of activities going on in Afghanistan that you would have found in Malay, in the Malay Peninsula in the 1870s, 1860s, 1850s, all around to hit that period. Everybody was up to the same game. Just that in Afghanistan, it's kind of lingered on a little bit longer. Afghanistan, I should say. Right, where was I? Right, yes, the Heisan and the Gihing fighting each other. Now Ibrahim gets desperate because business is bad when everybody's killing each other and the place is up in flames. And he brings in a man called Captain Speedy. Captain Speedy was a hero. Captain Speedy had been off in Abyssinia as a British agent, and he'd fought with the Abyssinians, but he'd also befriended the Abyssinian emperor and become very closely related to him, and then of course all hell let loose as diplomatic relationships went, and he had to Scarpa, and he had a lot of adventures. Let's put it that way. He was a big adventurer, and in fact, when the British took over in Ethiopia for that moment, or Abyssinia, I do believe it was called then, rather than Ethiopia. Anyway, the British, when they took over briefly and ousted the mad emperor, Captain Speedy was given the emperor's son to look after. Apparently, they were quite fond of the young chap, and they sent him off to Leeds University. I don't know whether it was called Leeds University, but the college up in Leeds there, I don't know what there was. There was a I know there was some mining engineering place there, because I went to Leeds University. See, so perhaps he was one of the early people who enrolled in that. Anyway, he died of a cold, I do believe. Oh, well, anyway, that's beside the point. Captain Speedy, by this time, had moved to Penang, and he was the chief of police in Penang. But the money was bad, and Nahi Ibrahim offered him a deal he just could not refuse, which was sort of like 10% of the entire income of the Lerut area if he could stop the Chinese from killing each other and get business back up. So Captain Speedy, he hired a few people from India. He brought them in, and they set up a little police force, an armed police force, of course, and he had quite a bit of success. So him and Nahi Ibrahim, they got things back on track, and with his robust and eccentric policing method. Well, I'll talk about it later on, but he was Nahi Ibrahim had set up this place, and these wars had finally come to a conclusion, but they'd all got mixed up with the succession dispute that took place when the Sultan of Perak died. His son Abdullah unfortunately didn't get back for the funeral, and this meant that Bendahara Ismail took over and became the Sultan. Now then, there is a sort of weird protocol where the son is supposed to be at the side of the Sultan for the Sultan to pass on the throne. But Abdullah wasn't there. It's not always convenient. You just don't know when people are going to drop down dead, do you? So he just wasn't there, and he didn't get back for the funeral. So the Bendahara took over, and he was not going to give it up. And Bendahara Ismail rather looked down upon Abdullah, who was another one of these young upstart characters. He wore a tie. He hung around with the Europeans and in Penang. He was a modernizer, and Ismail, well, he supported old Raja Mahdi and his kind, and I think he actually physically supported him. But we won't get confused. Won't confuse you even more. That was confusing enough. And so there was somewhat of a dispute there, and the Kihing and the Heisan chose their sides, or were paid to choose their sides, and they got involved in fighting over whose mine is mine and whose mine is yours, so to speak. So it was all rather chaotic, and Abdullah, seeing how the British helped sort out the chaos in Selangor, I thought, well, let's ask the British to help me establish my rule here and get business back. And the British leapt at the chance. Let's put it this way. They wanted a more robust position here. An interventionist policy. Well, they weren't going to call it a policy because, quite frankly, back in England, the policy was non-intervention. And, you've got Lord Aberdeen there, a Foreign Office and so on, calling it treachery, what was going on in Malaysia. The government really wasn't in favour of it, but they'd sent out Clark to sort things out, and he'd come to the conclusion, yes, we've got to have a coherent policy here, so let's set up a set of treaties here, and have all the chieftains sign up for it, and establish a nice coherent system. And so they were requested to come to Pangkor to discuss. Now then, discuss this treaty. Yes, that's another one of those terms, because Sultan Ismail, still at the time, refused to turn up. He went off and hid with his supporters further up the river, and La Ibrahim, he could see there was a certain amount of sense in this, and he was La Ibrahim was really trying to make himself sultan of Larut, because he was operating a system there totally independent of Abdullah and the rest, and so he thought he was a power broker, and he would turn up and he would look really important. He would, in fact he did, he brought his British lawyer with him. Well, he's a powerful man, has to have a lawyer, and he brought his British chief of police, so he already had plenty of British advisors as far as he was concerned, and of course he brought his own little army with him just for protection's sake. So he was a big man, and he literally wanted a seat at the table alongside Abdullah and the British. He wanted to be there, and when he turned up, how they laid out, they literally physically laid out the room was the British and Sultan Abdullah, soon to be officially recognised by all as Sultan Abdullah, sat at a table and sat on chairs, and the chieftains cross-legged on the floor. Well, no, Ibrahim wasn't having any of that, and he protested. He demanded they bring a chair in, and so the British grabbed hold of his shoulders, dragged him down to the floor, and told him to sit there and be quiet. This, of course, made him sit there and glower somewhat. Now, Ibrahim was now not pleased. He could see that this was going to be a stitch-up. And Captain Speedy suddenly realised that, hang on, whose side am I on? Yes, he could see his career disappear, and he's not going to get 10% of those mines now. The British were taking over. This is, well, his decision. We'll talk about them on another occasion, but as you can imagine, he could see things going in a rather odd way, despite the fact that he was terribly British, and of course he would support the crown, no matter what. And, especially if it could put some money in his pocket, guaranteed. No, Ibrahim's promise of money hadn't quite been fulfilled. He hadn't been paid properly yet, so he was feeling perhaps a little less loyal to him than Ibrahim would have liked him to have been. So the treaty is signed, willingly signed, by all these people. All the chieftains sign up to it because, well, it's obvious that if Ibrahim has to kowtow to them, who are they to resist? So there you go. The treaty is signed. Now there's interesting people that were involved in there. Frank Swettenham, of course. In fact, Frank Swettenham did the translation into Malay, and the translation into Malay was slightly ambiguous as far as Sultan Abdullah was concerned. The word advise doesn't necessarily mean you are obliged to take any notice, and that's his interpretation. And he's saying, that's what the Malay Malay translation So that was one of his arguments in there. But Frank Swedenham, of course, drove his wife mad, yeah, and became a future governor of the Straits settlements. And William Pickering was also there. William Pickering was a very important man in the handling of Chinese affairs. He spoke fluent Mandarin, and he was very much involved in trying to improve the conditions of Chinese indentured labourers. In fact, he was trying to get rid of that system and set up a protectorate for the Chinese labourers and trying to keep them out of the triads, of course. So he was also fighting against the triads. And naturally, he got an axe in his head, which drove him into early retirement to a villa in Italy, I do believe. And who else? Oh, yes, James Birch. Yes, James Birch was put forward as the official British resident who was going to assist Sultan Abdullah in creating a modern administration. And, of course, James Birch got speared whilst taking a shower. I say, the upside of being a British official in Malaya is very hard to find. But they still wanted to do it. So everybody signed up to the agreement, and we have James Birch as the British resident. And James Birch was an old hand from Ceylon, British Ceylon there, and he seems to have lost his patience in as much as he was determined to reform the system. He wanted to get rid of slavery, for instance. Could you? This was a traditional thing, and debt slavery. Well, that wasn't quite the same as working on the plantation. Well, not always, and yeah, they did beat the slaves on their households to death on occasions. But yeah, that was just the funny daughter of Abdul Samad, and it happens. Come on, you get annoyed with your servants, don't you? So, sometimes carried away. He was wanting to get rid of slavery altogether, and he wanted to. Once again, he was a bit like Bloomfield Douglas in that he wanted to centralise everything under the administration. All the taxation should be centralised and run through a state council. Right, the money where it would go should be run through the state council, that is. And of course it would go into a good solid British bank, and proper accounts would be taken care of. And he was absolutely determined to put this forward. Straight away, he became inundated by runaway slave girls. They would be constantly rushing to his boat and getting on board, and he would say, "Oh, right, okay, we'll save you." This habit of saving slave girls did actually make a number of the local Rajas wonder whether he was actually stealing their women. Was it women, land, gold? Well, yes. Well, he's got 2 out of 3 at the moment, and now he goes up the river to Pasar Salak, where Maharaja Leila is running his operation there, and he goes there. Well, why he goes there now? This is interesting. He'd been annoying everybody, including Sultan Abdullah, who was saying, Sultan Abdullah wanted him to calm down, just back off a bit here. Let's work things out. And he sent him off to Penang to pick up a suit for him. So, he's exerting a certain amount of authority here. a suit that he'd ordered from Savile Row places. He'd sent Birch off there, and then he had a meeting with all the other Rajas. He'd had a meeting with Sultan Ismail, who'd said, "Okay, I'm going to back off. I'll keep out of all this, and you run it your way, and we'll just agree not to disagree too openly." So he wanted to talk to all the other sultans, because he felt that they were all going to rush to Ismail because of James Birch's attitude here. And they had a seance even to work out what the future may hold. What was their vision? And they smoked a lot of opium, and a butterfly appeared. And the medium who was running this show said, "That butterfly is James Birch's evil soul." And they killed it. Now then, this sounds very odd, doesn't it? It's hardly what you would call a good way of making policy, but it seemed to satisfy a lot of people there that essentially they were just going to get it. Meant for Sultan Abdullah, it meant they were going to get rid of this guy. They've got, and he goes off to his solicitor and calls him in. I think it was one from Penang this time, and they discussed how one could impeach a British resident and get in somebody a little bit more amenable to reason, and to be a little bit more sensitive towards our culture, and also someone less likely to get crisped, because Maharaja Leila, it's all one word apparently, Maharaja Leila. It even comes to mean later on a term for someone who goes beyond, who's uncontrollable, so to speak, and steps well beyond their brief. Anyway, Maharaja Leila, it's a title that means he's the traditional protector of the Sultan. Well, he said, whoever is insulting my Sultan, whoever's undermining my Sultan's power, I will kriss them. And well, he meant it, and I think Sultan Abdullah was a little worried about that, and so he really went out of his way to try and find a peaceful solution to this whole situation. And there were warnings to James Birch that there was danger up there. And of course James Birch said, well, we have to make an example here, and the man to get rid of, once we've got rid of this troublemaker Maharaja Leila, once he's kowtowed and done what we've told him to do, then all the others will fall into line. And so he goes up to Maharaja Leila's place in Pasar Selak, and they post, he stops off, he's collected up a bunch of runaway women on the way on his boat, which of course gets back to Pasar Selak, and James Birch stops his boat there, and he sends his men ashore to the village and the palace, if you like, at the Istana, the customs house. It was a little complex that Maharaja had laid out there, and it was armed, and it was they had stockades there. It was like a little fortress of some sort. Anyway, his men go around the place, posting cease and desist notices. You stop your operation here. You cannot run the customs houses here. You cannot stop boats and take money. And they post these posters all over the place, which basically means they could just, they weren't being stopped. And people stopped, read, and got angry, and started tearing down the posters. And one guy and his mates found that James Birch was having a shower in the shower house on the river, and they came and stuck him with spears through the walls. They just skewered him. He discovered what satay was, and they threw him in the river. At this point, so Maharaja Leila, he's suddenly informed that James Birch has been killed, and it's in for a penny, in for a pound, and so he calls out his men, and they go berserk, and they kill all the sepoys and get rid of them. Maybe they thought they could just hide it all away or something, and claim it was some bandits. I don't know what was going on, but Maharaja Leila obviously now panics, and he runs off into hiding, and goes back to his main areas to pick up support and raise the alarm. Now or never, we've got to get rid of all the British. And so everyone, Swettenham's up in Kuala Kangsar, and he suddenly finds himself being chased and having to hide. He gets, apparently he got one of his girlfriends to hide him in a boat. He's supposed to have escaped dressed up as a Malay with brown face paint on. So, so he has to make this ignominious escape, hidden at the bottom of a boat by one of his girlfriends. And Captain Speedy suddenly finds that he's being called upon to get his troops in line and go out hunting Maharaja Leila and so on. And he's, whose side is he on at this point? He's supposed to be the assistant resident now, which it was a deal that was done. Ibrahim was rather peeved to discover that Speedy was now in a position of authority over him, and yet he was employed by him. It was a very peculiar situation found himself in, and the army, Penang's wants to send in troops. That you've got a British resident who's just been murdered, and so consequently all hell is let loose, and they have a rather vicious little war, which results in finally Maharaja Leila being hunted down, and then he's tried. In fact, he's tried in Ibrahim's house in Larut, or what it was called Taiping now, by Speedy. And he's at him and a couple of others are tried and hung. The question is what to do with Abdullah. Abdullah, of course, he knew that something might happen, but he had warned people, and he was not, and he was uncertain as to which side he was on, and as a consequence, the British exiled him rather than hung him for collusion. They can't, and even that exile him at that point was there were a number of people who in the British administration who thought that was a bit too harsh on the guy. But Abdullah had tried to put the blame on others by hanging the culprits, so to speak, the actual guys that speared Birch, and then claim that these guys acted on their own. They were, I don't know, crazy or something. But he tried to cover things up a little bit for these other guys that got involved with it, and so I think that didn't go down well with the British. The result is that Sultan Abdullah is kicked out and sent off to the Seychelles, and well, doesn't sound too bad. He takes some of his favourite wives with him and his entourage, and Ibrahim ends up there, and he's really annoyed by it all because he's got to leave behind all his businesses, and yes, it's and as far as he was concerned, he hadn't got anything to do with it. He just sort of was going to try and ride the storm and just exist. Whoever won, he'd be on their side, so to speak. That was as far as he was concerned. So he was a bit miffed by that, to say the least. And our Sultan had to endure the ignominy of joining the Seychelles Victorian Cricket Club. I think it was the Victoria Cricket Club. Yes, yeah. And he had to learn cricket. I guess they thought he would learn fair play and other such upstanding virtues. And whilst he was in a French music hall or cabaret bar, he heard a song being sung by one of the artists, and he went and he adapted the melody. He was strangely enough, a composer and a writer. He was a bit of an artist, really, apparently. Very strange. But anyway, he composed this thing, wrote it all down. This tune then later on became the national anthem of Malaysia, which is probably about the oddest origin of national anthem as you can get. So that's what happened with the Pangkor Treaty. You get this, ended up in war and violence, and Abdullah, and a new sultan was taken on board, a guy that nobody liked. Nobody in Perak liked this guy. It was Sultan Yusuf. Yusuf was picked out because he had a direct line to another sultan who died in 1806. That's basically, it's way beyond. So he had some bloodline linkage there, and he was a bit of a traditionalist. He didn't really like the British. He was a bit awkward and so on. But he had he definitely was not on the side of Nai Ibrahim or Sultan Abdullah and or Ismail and so on. He was a bit of an outsider, and he had his own thing going on. But he became this temporary sultan, as the British put it, because quite frankly, who else was there? And he became developed some weird relationship with Hugh Low, the next resident, with whom Isabella Bird stayed. She met him in Penang, and he was, for her, in her mind, the model resident. So we're going to be looking at all that soon. So what have I got so far? Yes, that's right. Finally, Abdullah stayed there in Seychelles for 14 years and was allowed back in 1891 to, and he moved to Singapore. He didn't bother being a sultan or anything like that. He just decided to just be rich, as one does. And he moved back to Singapore, and the British Parliament, who had been petitioned by various members of the British administration in Malaya to let this guy go, because he doesn't deserve it. However, Frank Swettenham had made sure that he did, that he was kept away as long as possible. Frank Swettenham and Mr. Maxwell. Well, I'll tell you a little bit about their story later on, because they hated each other. Right, now then, this has been following in the footsteps of Isabella Bird, and she's going off to Penang soon. She's just passing through Pangkor, and I thought I'd fill you in a bit of the history of that area, and we'll carry on with her journey on the next episode of Following the Footsteps of Isabella Bird. Like, share, subscribe. I think it'll be that side. Definitely this side. So I'm going to point this side because, people do that. Like, share, subscribe, and comment, and yes, goodbye.